What's going on, guys? I'm Tyler, and I'm here to let you know that the Tragedy of Macbeth is no perfect movie. And for the very few of you who never studied this in English class or just didn't pay attention altogether, or you got saddled with some other more boring Shakespeare play, let me sum it up for you. Macbeth is a Scottish lord played by Denzel Washington here who, upon receiving a prophecy from a trio of witches that he'll become the next king of Scotland, he and his wife, played by Frances McDormand, form a plot to assassinate the current king, played by Brendan Gleeson. And once they do, they're surprised and incredibly disappointed that things turn out a lot more worse for their lives than they do better. Now, when I first heard that Joel Coen, only Joel Coen, was going to direct a Macbeth movie, I was surprised to find out that Ethan Coen has semi-retired in order to focus on directing theater, but I was still excited to check this out because out of all the Shakespeare plays, this was the one I respected the most, and it's one that has a lot of character and story beats that the Coens are famous for within their own movies. An incredibly violent story filled with characters who are manipulating and double-crossing each other for wealth, power, dominance, and the impact of coincidence and fate that it has on human beings, for better or worse. And I got even more excited when I saw the 30-second trailers revealing this was being filmed in black and white with a 4:3 aspect ratio in the older fashion style. I knew for sure that I had to see this in theaters, even if it meant waiting New Year's Day, even if it meant delaying my best of the year list. And I am so glad I did all of these things because The Tragedy of Macbeth is one of my favorite Shakespeare movies of all time now. Maybe it's a toss-up between Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet and this, because Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet was beautiful and a great movie to watch, even in high school. But I'm usually pretty picky when it comes down to straightforward Shakespeare adaptations, not counting stuff like Lion King or 10 Things I Hate About You. When a movie takes place in modern day, but it keeps the original script, like that's somehow supposed to be artsy or brand new, which it's not. As soon as Romeo plus Juliet happened, there were a few others that just ripped off that style, and it doesn't fit whatsoever. It's so over the top and exaggerated that, with a few exceptions, it's not even funny to laugh at how bad it is. And even with more faithful costume dramas, it can be pretty hit and miss because sometimes those movies are just the camera sitting still as the actors monologue to themselves, and that's it. There's no real style to it. There's no sense of originality or freshness to it. It might as well just be a filmed version of the play. And filmed versions of the play actually do end up in theaters, but I've never bothered to check one out because just from the sound of it, it feels like it could get boring after a while. But thankfully, The Tragedy of Macbeth sidesteps a majority of those cliches that you would expect with Shakespeare movies. For starters, Coen has the common sense to not make any actor do a Scottish accent unless they actually have one, which, boy, was that a huge relief. Could you imagine Denzel Washington doing a Scottish accent?
Scotty, that's the most convincing your accent has ever been.
Yeah, I don't want to imagine it either. But the thing that surprised me in the best possible way was just how subdued and nuanced the actors were in their facial expressions and their dialogue. They're not constantly dialed up to 11 shouting at the slightest change of their emotion to really sell the impact. If anything, these actors treat the dialogue as naturalistically and quietly as they would with any regular movie that takes place in the present day or even in the distant past. And that more grounded, realistic style of acting it made it so much easier to buy into the performances and the characters. And because their emotions were so dialed back and relatable, even if you can't understand a single word of the play, it doesn't matter because the actors have their facial expressions, their body language, and the right pitch and tone of their line delivery for us to understand what they're talking about and what they're experiencing in the moment. Denzel Washington, in my opinion, is a great choice to play Macbeth because he already has a reputation for playing the calm, cool, collective member of the group who secretly has a darker past. So, in the beginning, when he's contemplating whether to risk his life and sanity to form a coup or live by his previous moral principles and just keep what he has, being grateful about it, he's instantly believable and it's right in his wheelhouse. But once he goes down this dark path, starts to lose his mind at the fact that he has so much power that can be taken away from him within a split second, it actually calls for him to do the more over the top cliched Shakespearean rants that you would associate. And once he does those, it comes completely out of nowhere. His sudden outbursts are just loud, have an instant amount of energy to him, and it makes him a much more unpredictable, menacing figure to follow. I would even argue that Frances McDormand as Lady Macbeth was even better because, in a complete role reversal, just like the two characters, she can instantly sell the initial slimy, manipulative, and vengeful side of Lady Macbeth without ever having to raise her voice in the slightest. And it establishes her as the more dominant one in the relationship that naturally encourages Macbeth to try and make bigger decisions on his own and go further across the line than she ever would. And once he does that and she starts to express some regret and guilt over the path that she has led her husband on, she finally lets out her pain and frustration in the loudest possible way. And when she does, I won't spoil what it is, but I actually started shaking at just how it was built up so quietly, and then the climax of that scene was so sudden and impactful that I actually started shaking. Now, as for the side characters, Corey Hawkins did a good job as Macduff. I would have liked if he was a little more expressive in his emotions, but that is him being a little more faithful to the source material as Macduff, the one who right from the beginning is instantly skeptical of Macbeth's intentions once he becomes king, and in many ways is a polar opposite of him, because Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, even before they become homicidal maniacs, do their best to hide all of their emotions within themselves because of their backstory, whereas Macduff is consistently open and honest about everything he experiences, no matter how personal the pain can be. Alex Hassell as this one character I don't remember studying in high school was fantastic and sneaky with the way that he presents himself as a loyal ally to Macbeth in one scene, and then in the next, completely trustworthy towards Macbeth's enemies. And you never know for sure what it is his intentions are, whose side he's really on, even when he reveals exactly what he's going to do in a given scene when he's the only character in the room. And that performance was so terrific. It makes up for the fact that he completely butchered Vicious in Cowboy Bebop. That is a performance so bad it's comical. But here he's much more in his wheelhouse. It was fantastic to see. But the scene stealer supporting cast-wise was, without question, Catherine Hunter as the Three Witches. It's a genius idea to have one actress play all three of them. I absolutely loved it. And she has this ability to be simultaneously frail but sinister with the way that she can transform and contort her body. I don't want to spoil what it is, but especially having this grovelly, slimy voice. There are some scenes where you don't actually see the witches within the room, but the voice instantly gives the scene an extra level of suspense and tension. And the thing I've always loved about the witches is that even though they're kind of sort of evil, and if it weren't for them, the characters wouldn't have gone down the dark paths that they had, they don't actually force anyone to do anything. It actually makes you wonder what would have happened to everybody in the play if they hadn't approached Macbeth in the first place. And you also, thanks to some added in material, like when they have to respond to this higher power that has no name but is supposedly reigning authority over them, you wonder why they were sent to prophesize this to Macbeth. What exactly was the point of moving these events forward? And if those events hadn't been moved forward, would Macbeth still have been a decent individual? It's really hard to sum up, but it's one of those instances where a villain doesn't actually have to make a character do anything, just offer the slightest suggestion, and that suggestion alone can make people overanalyze the situation to the point where they make drastically stupid decisions. But as great as the performances and the writing are, things that you would already suspect with a movie like this, the nicest thing I can say about the Tragedy of Macbeth is that, unlike most other Shakespeare movies, as I mentioned before, where it's just the actor standing still in front of the camera talking and not much else. This movie is just as, if not more, visual than it is verbal. I loved the look of the black and white 4x3 cinematography. I have no idea how to pronounce the cinematographer's name, so I'll put it down here, but the style is so specific and reminiscent of German Expressionism, where the amount of silhouettes, shadows, and fog within each frame make the characters instantly look morally ambiguous or untrustworthy, giving it this grim, surreal looking atmosphere where the characters are constantly questioning what they're experiencing is reality, and as a result, so do we as the audience. In fact, in order to make the movie look more distorted, Joel Coen filmed the entire movie on sound stages, and those stages look incredible. The camera angles and the backgrounds that are inserted in make them appear much more larger in size than they probably were. And even when it has the 40s and 50s sensibility of some stages looking more realistic than others, you can tell that some of the backgrounds were painted because in this one forest, none of the leaves moved a muscle whatsoever. You still have little elements like people riding on horseback incredibly fast, an entire building being set on fire, or this one great sequence where water appears out of nowhere in Macbeth's room, and this reflection in the water he can pick up with his hands. The blend of practical and digital effects made this movie have the style of a mixture of a crime thriller, a period piece, and a psychological horror movie in the best possible way. And it was so surreal, hallucinogenic, and trippy that you really wish that movies from the 40s and 50s would have advanced technology, and as a result, they would have a little bit more staying power as films. Even when the direction is mundane and basic, Coen has the great idea of filming every big important speech in just this still shot of either the character that's speaking or characters who are being spoken to. And the more the shot holds on them talking or sitting quietly pondering their thoughts for an extended period of time, the more you're anticipating what they're thinking or about to say next. And the fact that actors are constantly staged in the foreground and the background of a given shot at once adds more suspense and tension and makes you wonder which characters in specifically are the ones plotting or simply just observing and listening. It does have a phenomenal score from Carter Burwell that adds to the psychological horror feeling that I mentioned before, and the use of sound effects where the slightest drop of water or footstep has an extra boom to it that makes you dread what might happen towards Macbeth or anyone he approaches when he starts to unravel his plans or his mind starts to unravel itself. There isn't as much action in the movie as I thought there was going to be, and the one legitimate flaw that I have with the film is that when there are moments of violence or Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are hallucinating something, there are entire shots that are quickly cut together in a matter of not even a second. So when a character is about to be stabbed, there are moments where you don't see the impact. You just see a person's stunned face and not much else. And it feels a little anticlimactic. And it also, because the shots are so quickly cut together, you wonder why those shots were even inserted, other than they kind of had the feeling like they were inserted by accident. That's not to say that there isn't any good action. There still are some exciting, intense fight sequences that do have brutal moments of gore when it's necessary, and each fight scene does move the story along. But it feels like Coen was trying to go for a less is more approach with the violence, and it feels pretty inconsistent when he does it. But nevertheless, I'm going to stop rambling as much as I can because the Tragedy of Macbeth is the perfect blend of what it feels like to watch the play on stage versus watching it in a movie. The blend of practical sets with much more realistic acting and an incredibly artsy but still accessible filming style make it, as I said before, one of, if not the best Shakespearean movies ever. And for that reason, I'm going to give the Tragedy of Macbeth a 4.5 out of 5. If theaters are still open, wherever you live, do check it out. If you have to wait till Apple TV premieres it in a couple weeks, I would still highly recommend checking it out. It is such It was such a great movie. It did not disappoint. And if Joel Coen continues to make movies on his own, he has my full-fledged support. Guys, thank you as always for watching. If you have seen The Tragedy of Macbeth, let me know in the comments below what you thought of it. Be sure to stay tuned for more 2022 movie reviews based on the based on my cowardly premieres decisions that may be few and far between. But in any case, be sure to stay tuned for more videos and be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.